The slap echoed across marble like a gunshot. Claire's cheek burned, but she didn't flinch. Not anymore. Around her, 200 guests in silk and diamonds froze mid-conversation, crystal glasses suspended in air. Her stepmother's hand hovered, still trembling with rage, while Clara's blood spotted the pristine white floor. This was it. The moment everything shattered. But before anyone could breathe, a voice cut through the silence, cold, absolute, dangerous. "Touch her again, and I'll have you arrested where you stand." Every head turned. The Duke of Blackmore had entered the room. "Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Clara's story travels." The first time Clara Whitlock understood she was trapped, she was 14 years old, standing in her father's study while he explained the ledgers. His hand, rough from years of writing and managing estates, guided hers across columns of numbers that represented lives, tenant families, crop yields, land boundaries that stretched beyond what her young eyes could see from any window. "This will be yours someday," he'd said, voice warm with something she'd later recognize as hope. "Not because you're my daughter, because you're smart enough to handle it." That was 7 years ago. Now, at 21, Clara stood in that same study, but the room felt smaller, darker. The ledgers were still there, locked in a cabinet her stepmother controlled. The land was still there, generating income her stepmother spent. And her father, well, he was 2 years in the ground, and whatever hope he'd carried died with him. "You'll wear the blue dress tonight." Victoria Whitlock didn't look up from her correspondence, her pen scratching across expensive paper with the mechanical precision of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of appearing busy. "The one with the high collar. Lord Ashford prefers modesty." Clara's hand stilled on the book she'd been pretending to read. "I haven't agreed to see Lord Ashford." "Your agreement wasn't requested." Victoria's pen continued its march across the page. "He's arriving at 7. You'll be presentable, cordial, and you will not embarrass me with your opinions about estate management or literature or whatever other unsuitable topics you think make you interesting." The study's afternoon light slanted through windows Clara's father had once thrown open every morning, claiming a room needed to breathe. Victoria kept them shut. Claimed the draft was bad for her complexion. Clara closed her book, Wollstonecraft, which she kept hidden inside the cover of a gardening manual. "Lord Ashford is 53 years old. He's buried 2 wives. His estate is drowning in debt, and the only reason he's interested in marriage is because he needs money, and you have it. Though technically, I control it until you marry or turn 25. Victoria finally looked up, her expression pleasant and empty as a porcelain mask. "Which means you'll be married long before then. The only question is whether you walk into this arrangement with dignity or whether I have to drag you." There it was. The truth Clara had been living with since the day after her father's funeral, when Victoria had locked herself in his study with the estate lawyer for 6 hours and emerged with documents that somehow made her guardian, trustee, and sole decision-maker for everything Thomas Whitlock had built. He was cruel to them. Clara's voice came out steady, which surprised her. "His wives. Everyone knows it. Everyone gossips." Victoria returned to her correspondence. "There's a difference. Besides, cruelty is subjective. Some might call it discipline, structure, things you sorely lack." Clara felt something sharp and hot rise in her throat. "My father wouldn't have—" "Your father is dead." Victoria's pen stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any shout. When she looked up again, her eyes were flat. "And he left you in my care because he trusted my judgment. Perhaps he knew you needed a firmer hand than his indulgent affection provided." The lie was breathtaking in its completeness. Thomas Whitlock had remarried when Clara was 12, after her mother's death had left him drowning in grief and whiskey. Victoria had been young, pretty, and very, very patient. She'd played the devoted stepmother for exactly 18 months, long enough for Clara's father to revise his will, adding provisions that seemed reasonable at the time. "In the event of my death before Clara's majority, Victoria shall serve as guardian and trustee, ensuring my daughter's security and well-being until such time as she marries or reaches the age of 25. He'd meant it as protection, a way to make sure Clara wasn't left alone. Instead, it was a cage with legal locks. "I won't marry him." Clara stood, her book falling to the floor. "You can't force me." "Can I?" Victoria tilted her head, genuinely curious. "What exactly do you think you'll do, Clara? Run away? With what money? The quarterly allowance I give you wouldn't buy a coach ticket to London. Appeal to the courts? On what grounds? That I'm arranging a perfectly respectable marriage for you? That I'm managing your inheritance, which, I might add, has grown considerably under my stewardship? Each word landed like a carefully placed stone, building a wall Clara couldn't see a way around. You could simply refuse Lord Ashford at the altar, Victoria continued almost kindly, though that would be remarkably foolish. You see, I've spent considerable time reviewing your father's papers. Did you know he had debts you knew nothing about? Gambling debts, actually, quite substantial. Of course, I've been paying them down from the estate funds, but if you were to prove difficult, I might discover I've made errors in the accounting. The courts could tie up your inheritance for years while they sort out the mess. You'd have nothing, be nothing. The threat wasn't even veiled. It was laid out like a meal, plated and presented with all the warmth of a business transaction. Clara's nails cut into her palms. He didn't gamble. Didn't he? Who's to say? I have the papers, I have the ledgers, I have the witnesses who'll confirm whatever story I tell. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirts with practiced elegance. You, my dear, have a choice. Marry Lord Ashford and live comfortably as a baroness, or fight me and discover just how thoroughly I can destroy what's left of your father's legacy. She crossed to the door, then paused. The blue dress. 7 o'clock. If you're late, I'll have Mrs. Carson dress you herself. We both know you'd find that humiliating. The door clicked shut with the soft finality of a coffin closing. Clara stood alone in the study, surrounded by her father's books, his maps, his carefully maintained records of a life spent building something that mattered. All of it under Victoria's control now. All of it turned into leverage. She walked to the window Victoria kept locked. Through the glass, she could see the east fields, green and golden in the late afternoon sun. Her father used to ride that land every morning, talking to the tenant farmers, checking irrigation, discussing crop rotation like it was the most important conversation in the world. This will be yours someday. But someday kept retreating like a horizon she'd never reach. Clara pressed her forehead against the cool glass and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of despair. Then she straightened, smoothed her skirts, and went upstairs to prepare for dinner with a man she'd rather die than marry. She wore the blue dress. Lord Ashford arrived at 7 precisely, which Clara supposed said something about his character, though nothing good. Punctuality in a man with no other virtues was just efficiency in being terrible. He was shorter than she'd expected, with the kind of soft belly that came from years of rich food and little activity. His hair, thinning and gray, was combed forward in a style 20 years out of fashion. Yes, but it was his eyes that made Clara's skin crawl, pale blue and oddly flat, like looking at painted glass. Miss Whitlock. He took her hand with damp fingers. What a pleasure to finally meet you properly. Properly meant with her stepmother's approval and a marriage contract already drafted. Lord Ashford. Clara kept her voice neutral, her hand limp. He held it too long. Dinner was a special kind of torture. Victoria had outdone herself, ordering dishes Clara knew cost more than most families saw in a month. Roasted duck with cherry sauce, potatoes and cream. 3 kinds of wine Clara wasn't allowed to touch because Victoria had decided she lacked the constitution for spirits. Lord Ashford lacked no such constitution. By the second course, his cheeks were flushed, and his conversation had devolved from boring to actively offensive. I've always believed women are at their best when they embrace their natural delicacy, he announced, sawing into his duck with more violence than necessary. Too much education makes them contrary, argumentative. A well-run household needs a gentle hand, not a learned one. Victoria smiled from the head of the table. How right you are, Lord Ashford. I've tried to instill such wisdom in Clara, but she's inherited her father's stubborn streak. Stubbornness can be corrected. Ashford's eyes fixed on Clara with something that might have been hunger. My second wife had similar tendencies. Strong-willed, opinionated, but she learned. They all learn, given proper guidance. Clara set down her fork. How fortunate for them. The sarcasm sailed past him, but Victoria's eyes sharpened. Clara. Her name came out like a warning. I only mean, Clara continued, her voice steady despite the fury building behind her ribs, that it must have been educational, for them, learning from such an expert in proper guidance. Lord Ashford laughed. a wet sound that made Clara think of rotting fruit. Spirit, I like that. Shows good breeding. Of course, once we're married, you'll direct that energy toward more appropriate pursuits. Children, household management, a woman's true calling. And if I have other callings? The question escaped before Clara could stop it. Silence dropped over the table like a curtain. Victoria's fork clinked against her plate with deliberate softness. Clara. But Ashford waved her off, leaning back with the satisfied air of a man about to deliver wisdom. Other callings? Such as? Managing the estate. Clara met his eyes. My father trained me in land management, crop rotation, tenant relations. I know every acre of this property, every family that works it. I thought, you thought wrong. Ashford's smile didn't reach his eyes. Whatever your father indulged you in, and I assure you it was indulgence, ends when you become my wife. My estate is managed by my steward. Your estate will be managed by me. Your responsibility will be to produce heirs and maintain my household. Nothing more. The words landed like stones in still water, spreading silence in every direction. Clara felt something inside her crack. Not break, not yet, but fracture. A fine line running through the foundation of whatever control she'd been maintaining. I see. She placed her napkin beside her plate with careful precision. And if I'm not interested in that arrangement? Victoria's chair scraped back. Clara, a word. Now. No. Clara didn't raise her voice, didn't have to. The single word carried enough weight to stop Victoria mid-rise. I think Lord Ashford deserves honesty. Don't you? Ashford's expression shifted, amusement draining into something colder. Honesty? Very well. Honestly, Miss Whitlock, you have no choice. Your stepmother and I have an agreement. The marriage contracts are drafted. Your cooperation is expected but not required. We can do this pleasantly, or we can do it otherwise. The result will be the same. The result, Clara said slowly, being that you gain control of my inheritance, and I become property. You become my wife, he leaned forward, which under law amounts to the same thing. Your property becomes mine. Your decisions become mine. Your body, his smile returned, thin and sharp, becomes mine. That's not cruelty, Miss Whitlock. That's marriage. Victoria had gone very still, her face unreadable, but she didn't contradict him, didn't soften the blow. If anything, her silence was confirmation. Clara stood. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees and forced herself to stay upright. Then I suppose we understand each other, Lord Ashford. You want my money. You want control. You want a woman you can break into whatever shape suits you. She turned to Victoria. And you want me gone, disposed of, problem solved. Sit down. Victoria's voice was ice. You're being hysterical. I'm being honest. Clara's hands were shaking now, too. She hid them in her skirts. For possibly the first time since Father died. So let me be perfectly clear. I will not marry Lord Ashford. I will not marry anyone you choose. And I will not spend the rest of my life being sold to the highest bidder because you've turned my inheritance into a bargaining chip. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Lord Ashford laughed. Actually laughed, like Clara had told the funniest joke he'd heard all year. Victoria, he said, still chuckling, you were right. She is spirited. This will be entertaining. He stood, adjusting his jacket. I'll return next week for the formal announcement. Perhaps by then Miss Whitlock will have learned some manners. If not, well, that's what wedding nights are for. He left. Clara heard the front door close, the carriage pull away, and still she stood frozen in the dining room, Victoria's cold fury radiating across the table like winter frost. You stupid, stupid girl. Victoria's voice was soft. That made it worse. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Told the truth. You've humiliated me, insulted a peer, and proved that you're too unstable to be trusted with your own decisions. Victoria moved around the table with predatory grace. I've been patient. I've been understanding. I've given you every opportunity to behave like a rational adult, but clearly you're incapable of it. I'm incapable of letting you sell me. The slap came fast enough that Clara didn't see it coming. Her head snapped to the side, cheek exploding in hot, sharp pain. She stumbled, catching herself on the back of a chair. You will learn your place. Victoria's hand was still raised, trembling. One way or another. Clara touched her face. Her fingers came away wet. Not tears. blood. Victoria's ring had caught her cheekbone, splitting the skin. She looked at her stepmother, really looked at her, and saw something she'd been refusing to acknowledge for 2 years. Not just cruelty, not just greed, but genuine hatred. Deep, settled, immovable hatred for a girl whose only crime was existing. Why? Clara's voice came out broken. What did I ever do to make you hate me this much? For a moment, just a heartbeat. Something flickered across Victoria's face. Something almost human. Then it was gone, replaced by that smooth, empty mask. You existed, Victoria said simply. You were his daughter, his legacy, his hope. And I was, what? The woman who kept his bed warm? The stepmother everyone tolerated? You want to know why I hate you, Clara? Because every time he looked at you, he saw a future that had nothing to do with me. And now he's gone, and you're still here. And I'll be damned if I let you have what should have been mine. The honesty was more shocking than the slap. Clara straightened slowly. Blood dripped onto her blue dress, staining the collar Victoria had chosen. Then I guess we both know where we stand. We do. Victoria's voice went cold again. Which is why I'm giving you one last chance. Tomorrow, you will apologize to Lord Ashford. You will accept his proposal, or I will have you declared mentally unfit and committed to an asylum. Don't think I won't. Don't think I can't. I have doctors who'll swear you're unstable. I have witnesses who'll testify to your erratic behavior, and I have the legal authority to make that decision on your behalf. She leaned in close, and Clara could smell her perfume, roses and something chemical underneath. Choose, Clara, marriage or a cell. Either way, you're gone. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat at her window, watching the moon track across the sky, her cheek throbbing where Victoria's ring had caught it. Mrs. Carson had brought bandages without comment, her old face carefully blank, and Clara had let her work in silence. Now, alone, Clara took stock of her situation with the same methodical precision her father had taught her for managing difficult tenants. Assets. None. Her allowance was controlled by Victoria. Her inheritance was locked until marriage or age 25. She had no money, no transportation, no legal standing. Allies. None. The servants answered to Victoria. Her father's friends had faded after his death, offering condolences but no real help. She had no family left. Her mother's relatives had died years ago. Options. Marry Ashford and lose everything slowly, or refuse and lose everything immediately. Unless, Clara stood pacing her room, there had to be something. Some angle Victoria hadn't considered. Some weakness in the cage. The law was clear. Victoria had guardianship until Clara married or turned 25. But guardianship meant protection, didn't it? Care. Victoria had to maintain at least the appearance of propriety or risk having her authority questioned. Clara stopped pacing. That was it. The weakness wasn't in the law, it was in perception. Victoria needed to look like a proper guardian, caring, responsible. The moment she crossed too far into obvious cruelty, the moment witnesses saw what she really was. But who would care? Who would step in? Clara had no allies, no friends in society, no one who'd risk Victoria's displeasure to help a girl everyone assumed was just being difficult. She needed a witness, someone powerful enough that Victoria couldn't threaten them, someone who'd care about the truth more than social convenience. Clara thought of the names she knew. Lord Pemberton, too old, too weak. Lady Ashford, Ashford's sister, obviously useless. The Harrisons, the Montgomerys, the Blackwoods. All of them too comfortable, too invested in maintaining the status quo. The Blackmores. The name came to her like a half-remembered dream. The Duke of Blackmore. She'd never met him. He rarely attended social events, preferring his northern estates. But she'd heard stories, cold, powerful, and, this was key, unmarried, which meant no wife whose opinion he had to consider, no family alliances that might make him hesitate. He was also, according to rumor, completely indifferent to social pressure. Rich enough that he didn't need approval, powerful enough that he didn't fear consequences. If Clara could get his attention, make him see what Victoria was doing, it was a desperate plan. More than desperate, insane. She had no way to reach him, no guarantee he'd care even if she did, but it was something. A direction that wasn't toward Ashford's estate or an asylum cell. Clara returned to the window. Dawn was bleeding into the sky, turning everything gray and gold. In 12 hours, there would be a party. The Pembrokes' summer gathering, where half of society would gather to gossip and drink and pretend the world was exactly as it should be. Victoria had already announced they'd attend, wanted to show Clara off to Ashford again, this time with witnesses to ensure she behaved. Clara touched her bruised cheek and felt something hard and bright kindle in her chest. Not hope exactly, something sharper, more dangerous. If Victoria wanted a public display, Clara would give her one, just not the kind she expected. The Pembrokes' estate looked like something out of a fever dream, all white marble and gold trim, gardens so perfectly manicured they seemed artificial. 200 guests milled through rooms the size of Clara's entire house, their voices blending into a constant hum of polite nothingness. Clara stood near the grand staircase, her bruised cheek covered with powder that Mrs. Carson had applied with shaking hands that morning. The makeup did its job, mostly, but Clara could still feel the throb beneath it, a reminder of what waited if she failed tonight. "Smile more." Victoria appeared at her elbow, champagne glass in hand, her own smile perfect and empty. "You look like you're attending a funeral." "Maybe I am." Victoria's fingers dug into Clara's arm, nails biting through silk. To anyone watching, it looked like an affectionate touch. "Lord Ashford is by the terrace. You will join him. You will be charming. And if you even think about causing a scene, I will make you regret it in ways you cannot imagine." She released Clara and glided away, already greeting some countess with false warmth. Clara took a breath, then another. Her hands were shaking again, so she clasped them together and started walking toward the terrace, toward Ashford, toward the future Victoria had mapped out for her. She made it 3 steps before changing direction. The library. Every estate like this had one, a showroom full of books nobody read, where people went to escape the noise or conduct affairs they didn't want witnessed. Clara slipped through the crowd, keeping her head down, and found the door half hidden behind a marble column. Inside, the noise dropped to a muffled hum. Rows of books stretched toward a ceiling painted with cherubs and clouds. Clara walked to the far end, where tall windows overlooked the gardens, and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. What was she doing? She had no plan. No real strategy beyond some vague idea of making Victoria show her true face in public. But how? Victoria was careful, controlled. She'd spent 2 years building her reputation as the devoted stepmother, the tragic widow managing her late husband's affairs with grace. One outburst from Clara would just look like exactly what Victoria claimed, a spoiled girl throwing a tantrum. "You're bleeding." Clara spun. A man stood near the doorway, half in shadow, tall, dark-haired, dressed in black that made him look like a piece of the night that had wandered inside. She hadn't heard him enter. "I'm not—" She touched her cheek. Her fingers came away red. The powder had cracked. "You should have someone look at that." He moved into the light, and Clara's breath caught. She knew his face. Everyone did, even if they'd never met him. Adrian Blackmore, Duke of Blackmore, the man whose name came up in conversation the way weather did. Inevitable, discussed, but never really known. "It's nothing." Clara fumbled for a handkerchief, trying to wipe away the blood without smearing the makeup further. It's fine." "It's not." He crossed the room with the kind of easy confidence that came from never doubting you belonged anywhere you chose to be. Up close, his eyes were gray, not the soft gray of morning mist, but the hard gray of winter stone. "That's a fresh wound under old makeup. Someone hit you." It wasn't a question. Claire's throat went tight. "With respect, Your Grace, that's not your concern." "Maybe not." He pulled out his own handkerchief, black silk, and held it out. "But you're in my cousin's library, bleeding on his carpet, and you look like you're deciding whether to run or fight. I'm curious which you'll choose." She took the handkerchief because refusing seemed more dangerous than accepting. The silk was soft, expensive. She pressed it to her cheek and felt the throbbing ease slightly. "I'm not running," she said. "Then fighting." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "Against who?" Clara almost laughed. The sound came out broken. "Everyone?" "No one." "Does it matter?" "It does if you want to win." She looked at him, really looked. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 30. No softness in his face, no practiced charm, just sharp edges and that unsettling gray stare that seemed to see too much. I can't win, she said quietly. The game's rigged. All games are rigged. That's why you flip the board. He leaned against a bookshelf, arms crossed. Who hit you? Why do you care? I don't like bullies, and whoever left that mark is won. His voice was flat, matter of fact. So, who? Clara could have lied, should have lied, but something about his directness, his complete lack of social performance, made the truth easier than fiction. My stepmother, Victoria Whitlock. Recognition flashed in his eyes. Thomas Whitlock's widow. And my guardian. And the person currently selling me to Lord Ashford like livestock. The words spilled out before Clara could stop them. She waited for shock, for discomfort, for the polite retreat that usually followed honesty. Instead, Blackmore's expression went colder. Ashford, the one who buried 2 wives under suspicious circumstances? 3, actually. Everyone forgets the first one. Clara's laugh was bitter. But yes, him. Apparently my inheritance makes me worth the risk. Blackmore was quiet for a long moment. Then he pushed off the bookshelf and walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where guests wandered in pretty clusters. Your father trained you in estate management, he said. Clara blinked. How did you? Thomas and I corresponded occasionally. He was proud of you, mentioned it often. Blackmore glanced back at her. Said you had a better head for land management than most men he knew. Something hot and painful lodged in Clara's throat. Her father had talked about her, had been proud, and she'd never known. That doesn't matter now, she managed. Victoria controls everything until I marry or turn 25, and she's determined I'll marry Ashford long before then. Or, Clara met his eyes, or she'll have me declared insane and locked away. She has doctors willing to sign papers, witnesses willing to testify, and legal authority to make it happen. That's not care. That's imprisonment. Yes, but it's legal imprisonment, which makes it worse. Clara pressed the handkerchief harder against her cheek, feeling the sting. I thought maybe tonight I could make her show what she really is, let people see. But she's too careful, too controlled. And I'm nobody. A girl making accusations against her respectable guardian. Who's going to believe me? Blackmore turned fully to face her. What if you had a witness, someone people couldn't dismiss? Clara's heart skipped. Like who? Like me. The offer hung in the air between them, impossible and terrifying. You don't even know me, Clara said. I know your father spoke highly of you. I know someone hit you hard enough to leave a mark, and I know Ashford's reputation. His voice was clinical, laying out facts. That's enough. Enough for what? To make this interesting. Something that might have been a smile touched his mouth. Go back to the party. Find your stepmother. And when she makes her move, because she will, don't back down. I'll be watching. And then what? Then I'll do what I do best. He walked toward the door, pausing beside her. I'll make the powerful uncomfortable. He was gone before Clara could respond, leaving her alone with a blood-stained handkerchief and the wild, reckless feeling that she'd just made a deal with something dangerous. But maybe dangerous was what she needed. Clara left the library and walked straight into hell. Victoria stood in the main ballroom, surrounded by a cluster of society women, the kind who shaped reputations with whispers and destroyed lives with raised eyebrows. Lord Ashford was beside her, one hand possessive on her elbow, his face flushed with wine and satisfaction. Ah, Clara, Victoria's voice carried across the marble floor. We were just discussing you. Every instinct screamed at Clara to run. Instead, she walked forward, chin up, and felt the room's attention shift toward her like a predator catching scent. Nothing terrible, I hope, Clara said lightly. On the contrary, we were discussing your upcoming engagement. Victoria's smile was razor sharp. Lord Ashford has been kind enough to formalize his proposal. I've accepted on your behalf. The words hit like a physical blow. Clara felt the floor tilt, her vision narrow. Around them, women whispered behind fans. Men exchanged knowing looks. And Ashford looked at her like she was already his. You can't do that, Clara said. Her voice sounded distant, strange. You can't accept a proposal for me. As your guardian, I can do exactly that. Victoria's tone was patient, explaining to a child. It's in your best interest, dear. Lord Ashford is eager to move forward. We're announcing it tonight. No. The word came out too loud. Heads turned. Clara felt panic rising but pushed it down, forced herself to stay standing. No, I won't marry him. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Clara, you're making a scene. Good. Maybe people should see... See what? A hysterical girl who doesn't know her own mind? Victoria stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough that only Clara and the immediate circle could hear. Look at yourself. You're flushed, shaking, barely coherent. Is it any wonder I worry about your stability? It was masterful. Every word designed to make Clara look unbalanced, while Victoria appeared concerned, loving even. I'm not hysterical, Clara said, but her voice cracked. I'm trapped. You've trapped me, and you're pretending it's for my own good. That's enough. Victoria's hand shot out, gripping Clara's wrist. To observers, it looked supportive. The pressure of her nails told a different story. I think you need rest. You're clearly overwhelmed. I'm not overwhelmed. I'm being sold. The slap came in full view of 50 witnesses. Clara's head snapped to the side, her cheek exploding in fresh pain where the old wound split open. Blood spotted the white marble. Women gasped, men stepped back, and Victoria's hand hovered in the air, trembling with rage she could no longer hide. You ungrateful, foolish girl! Victoria's voice was low, venomous. After everything I've done for you. After the patience I've shown. Patience? Clara's laugh was wild, edged with hysteria she could no longer suppress. You've hit me, threatened me, sold me to a man who kills his wives. She's delusional. Victoria looked around at the frozen crowd, her mask cracking but still mostly intact. You see what I've been dealing with? These accusations, this instability. I've tried to help her, but she needs professional care. Touch her again and I'll have you arrested where you stand. The voice cut through the ballroom like a blade through silk. Everyone turned. Adrian Blackmore stood at the edge of the crowd, still as carved stone, his gray eyes fixed on Victoria with something that made the temperature drop 10 degrees. Victoria's face went white. Your Grace, this is a private family matter. There's nothing private about striking someone in front of 200 witnesses. Blackmore moved forward, the crowd parting like water. And nothing familial about assault. She's my ward. I have the right to discipline. You have the right to guardianship, not abuse. He stopped beside Clara, close enough that she could feel the cold fury radiating off him. Miss Whitlock, are you injured? Clara touched her cheek. Her fingers came away red. Yes. Do you feel safe with Mrs. Whitlock? Every eye in the room was on her. This was it. The moment she either condemned herself or broke free. Clara met Blackmore's gray stare and saw something there. Not pity, not even kindness. Just cold, absolute certainty. No, she said. I don't. Victoria's laugh was sharp, desperate. Your Grace, surely you don't believe this performance. She's been unstable for months, making wild accusations, refusing reasonable arrangements. I've been patient, but... But you hit her. Blackmore's voice was flat. In public. Which suggests that in private it's worse. I was provoked. I don't care. He looked at Victoria like she was something unpleasant he'd found on his boot. Here's what's going to happen. Miss Whitlock is coming under my protection. Effective immediately. If you attempt to prevent it, I'll have you charged with assault. If you attempt to pursue guardianship rights, I'll ensure every detail of your treatment of her is made public. And if you try to have her committed, his smile was colder than his stare. I'll bury you. The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria's face cycled through shock, fury, calculation. You can't simply take her. I'm her legal guardian. The courts will do what I tell them. Blackmore held out his hand to Clara. Miss Whitlock, do you accept my protection? Clara stared at his outstretched hand. She barely knew this man, had spoken to him for all of 10 minutes in a library. He was offering to take on Victoria, the courts, society itself. All for a girl he'd just met. It was insane. It was also her only chance. Clara placed her hand in his. His grip was steady, grounding. I do, she said. Victoria's control finally shattered. You stupid, selfish child. Do you have any idea what you've just done? The scandal? The disgrace? Yes. Clara found her voice was steadier now, stronger. I've saved myself. From what? A respectable marriage? A stable future? Victoria's laugh was shrill. You think the Duke of Blackmore is rescuing you? He's ruining you. An unmarried man taking you under his protection? You'll be ruined. Completely. No one will touch you after this. Good. Clara met her stepmother's eyes and saw real fear there for the first time. Then maybe Lord Ashford will lose interest. Ashford, who'd been frozen in shock, finally found his voice. Your Grace, surely this is improper. Miss Whitlock has already spoken for... By who? Blackmore didn't even look at him. You. Last I checked, Miss Whitlock hasn't accepted your proposal. And her guardian's acceptance means nothing if obtained under duress. This is absurd. Ashford's face was purple now. Victoria, tell him. Tell him about the contracts. What contracts? Blackmore's voice went dangerously soft. Victoria's mouth opened, closed. For once, she had no answer. Marriage contracts signed without the bride's consent, Blackmore said slowly, like he was working through a puzzle. That's fraud. Possibly coercion, depending on the circumstances. He looked at Clara. Did you agree to any contracts? No. Clara's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. She told me she'd accept it on my behalf. I never signed anything. Then there's no engagement. Blackmore turned back to Victoria, and Clara had never seen anyone look so utterly unmoved by another person's fury. You've lost, Mrs. Whitlock. Accept it. I'll fight this. Victoria's voice shook. I'll take it to the courts. I have rights. So does she. Blackmore gestured to Clara's bleeding face. And I have money, power, and a deep dislike for people who abuse those weaker than themselves. So, by all means, fight. See how it ends for you. The threat wasn't even veiled. It was laid out like terms of surrender. Victoria looked around the ballroom, at the frozen faces, the shocked whispers, the complete destruction of her carefully built reputation. Then she looked at Clara, and for just a moment, her mask fell away completely. Pure hatred stared back. This isn't over, she said quietly. Yes, Blackmore replied. It is. He placed a hand on Clara's back. Nothing improper, just steady pressure guiding her forward, and led her through the crowd. People stepped aside, silent, their faces a mix of shock and avid curiosity. Clara walked in a daze, her hand still in Blackmore's, her cheek throbbing, her entire world tilting on an axis she couldn't quite grasp. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. But as they reached the entrance hall, as a servant brought Blackmore's coat and the reality of what came next started to sink in, Clara felt panic edge back in. Where am I going? She asked. Blackmore helped her into a cloak someone handed her. Probably not hers, but no one was going to argue with the Duke. My townhouse, for tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest. The rest of what? He looked at her then, really looked, and something in his expression softened just slightly. Whatever you want. That's the point of freedom, Miss Whitlock. You get to choose. A carriage pulled up outside, black and expensive, with the Blackmore crest on the door. Blackmore helped Clara inside, then climbed in after her. The door shut, cutting off the light and noise from the house. In the darkness, Clara finally let herself shake. I just ruined my reputation, she said. Destroyed any chance of a normal life. Victoria was right about that, wasn't she? No one will touch me now. I'm unmarriageable. Unmarriageable to men like Ashford, Blackmore said. Is that a loss? It's something. Clara pressed her hands to her face, feeling tears she refused to shed. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I just did. You stood up. His voice came out of the darkness, steady and sure. You fought back. That's more than most people ever manage. The carriage lurched into motion. Clara let her hands drop, staring at the dim outline of Blackmore across from her. Why? She asked. Why did you help me? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything. He was quiet for a long moment, then, Your father once told me that the measure of a society is how it treats those who can't defend themselves. He was talking about tenant farmers, but it applies. He leaned forward slightly. Victoria Whitlock was hurting you. I could stop it. So I did. It's not complicated. It feels complicated. Most things do in the moment. He sat back. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be difficult. Difficult how? Victoria's right about one thing. There will be scandal, questions, possibly legal challenges if she's foolish enough to push. He sounded unbothered, like he was discussing the weather. We'll handle it. We? You're under my protection now. That means you're my responsibility. I don't take that lightly. Clara wanted to ask what that meant exactly, what protection entailed, what he expected in return, but exhaustion was crashing over her like a wave, and her cheek hurt, and the adrenaline that had carried her through the night was fading fast. She leaned back against the carriage seat and closed her eyes. The last thing she heard before sleep took her was Blackmore's voice, quiet and certain in the darkness. You're safe now. I promise. And despite everything, despite the scandal, the uncertainty, the complete upheaval of her entire existence, Clara believed him. Clara woke to unfamiliar ceiling moldings and the smell of coffee she hadn't made. For 3 seconds, she forgot where she was. Then memory crashed back, the party, the slap, Blackmore's cold fury, Victoria's face twisted with hatred. She sat up too fast. Her head spun, and pain lanced through her cheek where the cut had reopened during the night. The room around her was enormous, decorated in dark blues and grays that probably cost more than her father's entire estate had earned in a year. A knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Whitlock!" A woman's voice, older, professional. "His Grace asked me to see if you needed anything. I'm Mrs. Phillips, the housekeeper." Clara looked down. She was still wearing yesterday's dress, blood-stained and wrinkled. Her hair had come loose from its pins. She probably looked like exactly what Victoria would claim, a hysterical girl who'd lost her mind. "Come in," she said, because what else could she do? Mrs. Phillips entered with the kind of efficiency that came from decades of service. She took one look at Clara, and her expression softened just slightly. "Oh dear. Let's get you cleaned up, shall we? His Grace has breakfast waiting, and you'll want to be presentable. The solicitors are coming at 10. "Solicitors?" Clara's stomach dropped. "What solicitors?" "His Grace will explain." Mrs. Phillips was already moving toward what turned out to be a dressing room larger than Clara's bedroom at home. "But first, let's do something about that dress. I've taken the liberty of having some clothes sent over. They should fit well enough." An hour later, Clara sat across from Blackmore in a dining room that could have hosted a small army. He looked the same as last night, controlled, precise, completely unbothered by the social catastrophe he'd caused. Clara felt like she'd been trampled by horses. "You need to eat," he said, gesturing to the spread of food that could have fed her and Victoria for a week. "I need to understand what's happening." Clara's hand shook as she reached for coffee. "You said solicitors. Why?" "Because Victoria will move fast. Probably already has." Blackmore cut into his eggs with surgical precision. "She'll file for an emergency hearing, claiming you're mentally unstable, and I've abducted you under false pretenses. We need to get ahead of it." The coffee turned to acid in Clara's mouth. "Can she do that? Just have me declared insane?" "She can try. She has doctors willing to sign affidavits. She has witnesses who'll testify to your erratic behavior, and she has legal standing as your guardian." He looked up, his gray eyes flat and calm. "But she doesn't have truth on her side, and she's never faced someone willing to fight as dirty as I am." "How dirty?" "Very." He set down his fork. "I've had investigators looking into Victoria since last night. Her finances, her past, her relationship with Ashford. By noon, I'll have enough to bury her 3 times over." Clara's breath caught. "That fast? Money opens doors, and I pay well for speed." He leaned back. "But here's the problem. Even with evidence, this goes to court. It becomes public. Your name, your father's name, everything. Victoria will drag you through the mud, make you look unstable, promiscuous, uncontrollable. Even if we win, the damage will be permanent. So what do? We don't hide." Blackmore's voice was steel. "We attack. Before she can file her petition, we file ours. We petition the court to remove her as guardian on grounds of abuse and financial misconduct. We make it so public, so undeniable, that she can't twist the narrative." Clara set down her coffee cup before she dropped it. "That's insane. You're talking about destroying her." "I'm talking about protecting you." His expression didn't change. "She hit you in public. What do you think she's done in private? What do you think she'll do if she gets control of you again?" Images flashed through Clara's mind. Victoria's hand raised, the asylum threat, Ashford's wet smile. "She'll lock me away," Clara said quietly, "or marry me off. Either way, I disappear." "Exactly. So we make sure she's the one who disappears instead." Blackmore stood. "The solicitors will be here in 20 minutes. They'll need to hear everything. Every threat, every instance of abuse, every financial irregularity you've noticed. Can you do that?" Clara thought about her father, about the ledgers he'd taught her to read, the land he'd trusted her to understand, about Victoria's hands controlling it all, spending it all, destroying everything he'd built. "Yes," she said. "I can do that?" "Good." He moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. This gets ugly. You'll need to be strong. They'll say terrible things about you, question your character, your morals, your sanity. You'll need to sit through it and not break. Can you do that too?" Clara met his eyes. "I've been sitting through Victoria's cruelty for 2 years. I think I can handle lawyers." Something that might have been approval flickered across his face. "Then let's go to war." The solicitors were 3 men in expensive suits who looked at Clara like she was an interesting puzzle they'd been paid to solve. The lead, a sharp-faced man named Pemberton, sat across from her with a notebook and the kind of detached professionalism that made her feel like a specimen under glass. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Your father's death." Clara talked for 2 hours straight. She told them about the funeral, about Victoria locking herself in the study, about the will that gave her guardianship. She told them about the allowance that barely covered clothes, about the locked ledgers, about servants dismissed for being too loyal to Clara's father. She told them about Ashford, about the dinner, the contract signed without her consent, the threats. And she told them about the violence, every slap, every grab, every time Victoria's control had slipped enough to show what lay underneath. Pemberton wrote it all down without expression. When she finished, he looked up. "Do you have evidence? Documentation of the abuse?" "Mrs. Carson saw the bruises. She bandaged my face." "A servant's testimony." "Useful, but not conclusive." "What about the financial misconduct?" "I don't have access to the ledgers. Victoria keeps them locked." "So no proof." Pemberton's pen tapped against his notebook. "What about witnesses to her behavior? Anyone besides servants who saw her strike you?" "Last night, at the Pembrokes. 200 people saw you provoke her, according to what's already circulating in society." Pemberton's voice was clinical. "The narrative is that you were hysterical. She was trying to calm you, and His Grace interfered in a family matter. It's not the story we want." Clara's chest tightened. "So what do we do?" "We find proof." Blackmore spoke from where he'd been standing by the window, watching the street. "The ledgers, the doctors she's paid off, the contract with Ashford. We need documentation that can't be dismissed as hearsay." "The ledgers are in my father's study. Victoria keeps it locked." "Then we get them." Blackmore turned to Pemberton. "File the petition today. Abuse, financial misconduct, unfit guardianship. Make it as public as possible. I want every newspaper in London covering this by tomorrow." Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "Your Grace, that's necessary. Victoria's already controlling the narrative. We need to shatter it." He looked at Clara. "Can you get into that study?" "It's her house. She's there." "Not tonight. She'll be at Lady Ashford's gathering. Damage control, trying to salvage her reputation. The house will be nearly empty." His eyes were hard. "I can get you in, but you'll need to be fast. Find the ledgers, anything that proves financial misconduct or connection to Ashford's contract. Can you do it?" Clara's heart was racing. "That's breaking and entering. That's retrieving your property from someone who's stolen it." Blackmore's voice was flat. "Your choice. We can try to fight this in court with what we have. Your word against hers. Servant's testimony she'll discredit. Or we can get proof." "If I'm caught." "You won't be. I'll make sure of it." He crossed to stand in front of her. "But if you're not willing to take the risk, tell me now. We'll find another way." Clara thought about Victoria's face last night. The hatred. The promise that this wasn't over. If she played it safe, Victoria would bury her. Legal or not, controlled or not, she'd find a way. "I'll do it," Clara said. "Tonight." Pemberton looked like he wanted to object, but Blackmore cut him off with a look. "Then it's settled. Pemberton, file the petition." Make it explosive. I want details, accusations, everything that will force the courts to take this seriously. He turned back to Clara. And you, prepare. We leave at 9. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparation. Blackmore's staff moved with military efficiency, gathering information, coordinating with investigators, building a case that felt both overwhelming and fragile. Clara tried to eat lunch and couldn't, tried to rest and ended up pacing her room, rehearsing what she'd look for, where she'd search. She knew her father's study, knew where he'd kept important documents, where he'd hidden things he didn't want found. But Victoria had had 2 years to reorganize, 2 years to hide evidence of whatever she'd been doing. At 8, Mrs. Phillips brought dinner Clara didn't touch. At 8:30, Blackmore knocked. Ready? Clara looked at herself in the mirror. She'd changed into dark, practical clothes Mrs. Phillips had found somewhere. Her face was pale, her eyes too bright. She looked terrified. No, she said, but let's go anyway. The carriage ride to her old house felt surreal. Clara watched familiar streets pass by the window, lit by gas lamps that turned everything golden and strange. She'd traveled this route 1,000 times. Never like this. Never as someone breaking into her own home. The staff will be minimal, Blackmore said, reviewing the plan one more time. Cook and maybe 2 housemaids. I've arranged for Cook to receive an urgent message requiring her attention in the kitchen. That gives you 15 minutes, maybe 20. And if Victoria comes back early, she won't. Lady Ashford's gatherings run late, and Victoria needs to be seen, needs to play the victim. His voice was cold. But if something goes wrong, you leave, immediately. Don't try to salvage it. The carriage stopped a block from the house. Blackmore helped Clara down, and they walked the rest of the way in shadow, keeping to the dark spaces between streetlights. The house looked different at night. Bigger. More imposing. Clara had lived here for 9 years, but right now it felt like enemy territory. Blackmore led her around to the servants' entrance. The door was locked, but he produced a key that shouldn't have existed and turned it with practiced ease. How? Clara started. Your Mrs. Carson is more loyal than Victoria knew. He pushed the door open. 15 minutes, starting now. Clara slipped inside. The kitchen was empty, as promised. She could hear voices from somewhere deeper in the house. The housemaids, probably. She moved quickly, keeping to the servants' corridors she'd learned as a child when she'd wanted to avoid tutors. The study door was locked. Of course it was. Clara pulled out the hairpin Mrs. Carson had given her, hand shaking, and worked it into the lock the way the old housekeeper had shown her that afternoon. It took 3 tries. Precious seconds ticking away. Then the lock clicked and the door swung open. The study looked exactly like it had when her father was alive, which somehow made it worse. Same desk, same chairs, same maps on the walls. But the smell was wrong. Victoria's rose perfume instead of her father's pipe tobacco. Clara went straight to the desk. The ledgers were in the second drawer, locked. She forced it with the letter opener, not caring about the damage. The wood splintered, and the drawer jerked open. 3 ledgers. Clara grabbed them all, flipping through pages of Victoria's neat handwriting. Numbers that didn't make sense. Payments to people Clara didn't recognize. Expenses that seemed inflated or entirely fabricated. Then she saw it. A separate account book, hidden under the others. This one detailed payments to Dr. Whitmore, the physician Victoria had mentioned as willing to sign commitment papers. £500 over 6 months. And underneath that, a contract. Signed by Victoria and Lord Ashford, dated 3 months ago. In exchange for marriage to Clara Whitlock and control of her inheritance, Lord Ashford agrees to pay Victoria Whitlock the sum of £10,000 and deed to the Ashford Northern properties. Clara's hand shook so badly she almost dropped the paper. Victoria had sold her, literally sold her like property, for money and land. Footsteps in the hallway. Clara froze. The voices were getting closer. Housemaids, talking about something mundane and normal, while Clara stood in a locked room with evidence of fraud in her hands. She shoved the contract and the account book inside her coat, left the ledgers on the desk, too bulky to hide. Then she moved to the window, remembering too late that it was locked from the inside and the drop was... The door handle turned. Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the door, heart hammering so hard she was sure it could be heard in the hallway. The door opened. A housemaid entered carrying fresh candles, humming softly. Clara held her breath, didn't move, didn't even blink. The housemaid set the candles on the desk, noticed the forced drawer, and stopped humming. What the? Clara moved. She didn't think, just acted, slipping out the door while the housemaid was turned away. The hallway was empty. She ran. Behind her, the housemaid shouted. Footsteps pounded. Clara hit the servants' stairs and took them two at a time, her coat flapping, the papers inside crackling with every step. She burst into the kitchen and found Blackmore waiting, his expression sharp. "Time to go," he said, and grabbed her hand. They ran together through the servants' entrance, into the alley, onto the street where the carriage waited. Clara threw herself inside. Blackmore right behind her, and the driver whipped the horses into motion before the door even closed. "Did you get it?" Blackmore asked. Clara pulled out the contract with shaking hands. "She sold me. £10,000 in property. She and Ashford had a signed agreement." Blackmore took the paper, read it in the dim light of the carriage lamp. His expression went from cold to glacial. "This is fraud, conspiracy, possibly extortion depending on how the courts read it." He looked up. "This is everything we need." Clara laughed, high and slightly unhinged. "I just broke into my own house and stole evidence from my stepmother. This is insane." "This is war." Blackmore folded the contract carefully. "And you just won the first real battle." But Clara's triumph faded as reality set in. "She'll know it was me. The forced drawer, the missing documents. She'll know." "Good. Let her know." Blackmore's smile was sharp. "Let her panic. Panicked people make mistakes." The carriage clattered through London's dark streets, carrying Clara away from the only home she'd known, and toward a future she couldn't begin to predict. They made it back to Blackmore's townhouse without incident. Clara handed over the documents to Pemberton, who arrived within the hour and read them with the focused intensity of a hunting dog catching scent. "This is extraordinary," he said. "Actionable. The fraud alone is enough to nullify the guardianship. The conspiracy with Ashford adds criminal charges." He looked at Blackmore. "If we move fast, we can have her arrested by tomorrow." "Then move fast," Blackmore said. Clara sat in a chair by the fireplace, exhaustion crashing over her. She'd done it. Actually done it. The evidence was real, undeniable. Victoria couldn't talk her way out of this, but the victory felt hollow, temporary. "She won't go quietly," Clara said. Pemberton looked up from the documents. "Most criminals don't, but the evidence, you don't understand." Clara met his eyes. "Victoria doesn't just want my inheritance. She hates me. This isn't business to her, it's personal, and when she realizes she's lost," Clara's voice broke, "she'll burn everything down rather than let me win." Silence filled the room. "Then we contain the fire," Blackmore said quietly. "We move first, hit hard, and don't give her room to retaliate." "How?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "She has nothing left to lose. That makes her dangerous. It also makes her predictable." Blackmore crossed to stand in front of her. "What's the worst thing she could do? The thing that would hurt you most?" Clara didn't have to think about it. "Destroy my father's legacy, the estate, the tenant families, everything he built. She could sell it all, fire everyone, salt the earth out of spite. Not if she's in custody, not if the courts freeze her assets." Pemberton was already writing. "We can request an emergency injunction." The front door slammed open. Everyone froze. Footsteps in the entrance hall, fast and hard. Then shouting, Mrs. Phillips' voice, high with alarm. Blackmore moved toward the door, but it burst open before he reached it. Victoria stood in the doorway, flanked by two constables and a man in judicial robes Clara didn't recognize. Clara Percharin. Her face was white with fury, her hair disheveled, her dress muddy at the hem like she'd run through streets. "There." She pointed at Clara with a shaking hand. "There she is. The girl who broke into my home, assaulted my staff, and stole private documents. I want her arrested. Now." The constables looked uncomfortable. The judge, because that's what he had to be, looked at Blackmore with something like apology. "Your Grace," he said. "I'm sorry, but Mrs. Whitlock has filed an emergency petition. Theft, assault, trespassing. She has witnesses." "The housemaid," Clara said. She'd forgotten about the housemaid. "Who will testify that you broke into a locked room, stole documents, and shoved her aside when she tried to stop you. Victoria's voice was triumphant. You wanted to make this public, Clara? Fine, let's make it public. Let's let everyone see what you really are. A criminal, a thief. Someone so unstable she breaks into homes and attacks servants. Blackmore stepped between Clara and the constables. She was retrieving her own property, documents her stepmother had no right to withhold. Documents from my house, my study, my locked desk? Victoria smiled. And she can prove they're hers how exactly? By claiming her dead father meant them for her? How convenient. The trap was beautiful in its simplicity. Clara had evidence of Victoria's crimes, but she'd obtained it through theft, which meant everything she'd found could be deemed inadmissible. And the act of taking it made her look exactly as unstable as Victoria had been claiming. This is ridiculous, Pemberton said. The documents prove nothing, since they were stolen. The judge looked genuinely regretful. I'm afraid Mrs. Whitlock's petition has merit. Miss Whitlock, you'll need to come with these officers. There will be a hearing tomorrow to determine— No. The word came out of Clara's mouth before she could stop it. No, I won't go. The constables moved forward. Blackmore blocked them, his face carved from ice. She's under my protection, he said. You're not taking her anywhere. Your Grace, the judge's voice hardened. Don't make this worse. The law is clear. There's been a crime committed by Victoria Whitlock. Fraud, conspiracy, assault. We have documented evidence, stolen evidence, which means it's questionable at best, inadmissible at worst. Victoria stepped forward, and Clara saw the calculation in her eyes. You thought you were clever, didn't you? Both of you. Thought you could ruin me with documents and testimony. But all you've done is prove exactly what I've been saying. Clara is unstable, dangerous, and she needs to be somewhere she can't hurt herself or others. You're not sending her to an asylum, Blackmore said, and there was something deadly in his voice. I'm not. The courts will. Victoria pulled out papers from her bag. Dr. Whitmore's affidavit, Dr. Carson's evaluation, 3 witnesses who will testify to her erratic behavior over the past 6 months, and now tonight's criminal act. She looked at Clara. You should have just married Ashford, dear. Would have been so much simpler. Clara felt the room tilting. She'd been so sure, so certain that the evidence would save her. But Victoria had turned it all around, made Clara's victory into her own crime. This is insane, Clara said. You can't— I can. I am. Victoria nodded to the constables. Take her. Gently, please. She's clearly disturbed. The constables moved toward Clara. Blackmore stepped in front of her, and for a moment Clara thought he might actually fight them, might do something violent and stupid that would destroy them both. Instead, he turned to look at her. Trust me, he said quietly. One more time. Then he stepped aside. The constables took Clara by the arms, not roughly, but firmly, like she was fragile, broken. No, Clara said. Her voice came out small, desperate. No, please. I'm not— I didn't— It's all right, dear. Victoria's voice was soft, concerned. We'll get you help, proper care. You'll feel better soon. They led Clara toward the door. She tried to pull away, tried to fight, but there were 2 of them, and they were strong, and she was losing, after everything. After the courage it took to stand up, to fight back, to steal those documents. After Blackmore's protection and Pemberton's legal expertise and her own desperate hope that truth would matter. Victoria was winning. Clara looked back as they dragged her through the doorway. Blackmore stood frozen, his face a mask of cold fury. Victoria watched with a small, satisfied smile. And Clara understood, with crystal clarity, that she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. The constables pulled her into the entrance hall. Through the open front door, Clara could see a carriage waiting, black, unmarked, the kind that took people away and didn't bring them back. This was it. The moment Victoria had been working toward since Clara's father died. The final removal of an inconvenient obstacle. Clara was about to disappear. Then Pemberton's voice rang out sharp and clear. Stop. I have a counterpetition, filed this afternoon, signed by a magistrate, removing Victoria Whitlock as guardian on grounds of documented abuse and fraud. Everyone froze. Pemberton held up papers, official seals visible even from across the room. The documents Miss Whitlock retrieved tonight were copies. The originals were already in court custody, Subpoenaed this morning based on testimony from estate workers and financial investigators. He looked at Victoria. You've been under investigation for fraud for 3 weeks, Mrs. Whitlock. Everything Miss Whitlock found tonight, we already had. You just didn't know it. Victoria's face went white, then red. You're lying. You couldn't have. We did. Blackmore's voice was soft, almost gentle. You thought you were so careful, but you forgot that servants talk, that your spending was visible, that fraud leaves trails even when you think you've covered them. He smiled, cold and final. You've lost, Victoria. Actually lost. And these officers aren't here for Clara. He looked at the constables. They're here for you. The judge pulled out different papers, his expression no longer regretful but coldly professional. Victoria Whitlock, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. These officers will escort you to custody pending trial. For one long moment, nobody moved. Victoria stood frozen, her mouth open, her eyes wide with disbelief. Then she lunged at Clara. The constables caught her, but not before she got close enough that Clara could see every line of hatred in her face. You ungrateful little wretch, Victoria hissed. After everything I did for you, after I saved you from your father's pathetic dreams and tried to make you useful, you'll regret this. I'll make sure you... The constables pulled her back, cutting off the words. Victoria fought them, dignity finally shattered, screaming accusations and threats as they dragged her toward the door. The judge watched with distaste. My apologies, Your Grace. We were misinformed about the nature of tonight's incident. He nodded to Clara. Miss Whitlock, the court will contact you regarding guardianship arrangements and the criminal proceedings against Mrs. Whitlock. Then they were gone. Victoria, the constables, the judge, all of it disappearing into the night like a fever dream. Clara stood in the entrance hall, shaking so hard her knees buckled. Blackmore caught her before she hit the floor, his arms steady, his voice quiet. You're safe, he said. It's over. But Clara couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop seeing Victoria's face, twisted with hate, couldn't stop hearing her own screams echoing off marble walls. She almost won, Clara whispered. But she didn't. Blackmore helped her to a chair, his hands gentle. You won, Clara. You actually won. Clara looked up at him, at Pemberton hovering in the doorway, at Mrs. Phillips wringing her hands with worried relief. She'd won. Victoria was in custody. The evidence was real. Clara was free. So why did she feel like the walls were still closing in? The walls weren't closing in. They were just too close, too new, too full of borrowed air. Clara sat in Blackmore's library 3 days after Victoria's arrest, staring at legal documents that should have felt like freedom but read more like a different kind of cage. The court had appointed Blackmore as temporary guardian pending resolution of Victoria's trial. Temporary. Guardian. 2 words that made Clara's skin crawl even when they came attached to the man who'd saved her. You're not reading, Blackmore said from across the room. Clara looked up. He was working through his own stack of papers, something about northern timber contracts, completely unbothered by her presence. That was the strangest part of living here. He didn't hover, didn't demand gratitude or explanations, just existed in the same space like it was normal to have a traumatized girl camping in his library. I'm reading, Clara lied. You've been on the same page for 20 minutes. He didn't look up. What's wrong? Everything, nothing. Clara set down the papers, something about her inheritance, the estimated value, the timeline for full transfer. This says I can't access my own money until I'm 25 or married, just like before. Until the guardianship is resolved, it's temporary. Everything's temporary. Victoria's in custody, temporary. You're my guardian, temporary. I'm living in your house. She stopped, throat tight. I'm still not free. I've just traded one cage for a nicer one. Blackmore's pen stopped moving. He looked at her then, really looked, and Clara saw something shift in his expression. You want out. It wasn't a question. I want... Clara's hands clenched on the armrest. I want to not need saving. I want to wake up and not wonder who controls my life today. I want... Her voice cracked. I want to be able to stand on my own. Silence stretched between them. Outside, London went about its business. carriages clattering past, vendors shouting, life continuing like Clara's world hadn't just exploded. "Then do it," Blackmore said. Clara blinked. "What?" "Stand on your own. Leave. Rebuild." He set down his pen. "The estate's yours once the courts clear the paperwork. Take it. Run it. Prove you don't need anyone." "I can't. The guardianship is a legal formality I can dissolve tomorrow if you ask me to." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "I took it to protect you from Victoria. But if you'd rather have independence than protection, say so. I'll file the papers today." Clara stared at him. "Just like that?" "Just like that." "But the scandal. Society will what? Judge you? They're already doing that. Say you're ruined. You are, by their standards." He leaned back, arms crossed. "You're never going to be respectable again, Clara. Not to them. So stop trying to please people who are never going to accept you anyway. Do what you actually want instead." The words hit like cold water, shocking and clarifying. "What I want," Clara said slowly, "is to go home. To my father's estate. To the land he taught me to manage. I want to run it myself. No guardian, no husband, no one telling me what I can and can't do." "So do that." "Alone? A woman running an estate alone? That's unusual. Difficult. Probably going to be miserable for the first 6 months." Blackmore's expression didn't change. "But possible. You know the land, know the tenants. Your father trained you for exactly this." Clara felt something crack open in her chest. Hope, maybe. Or terror. Hard to tell the difference. "You'd really let me go?" "I'm not letting you do anything. You're not mine to let." He picked up his pen again. "I'm offering you a choice. Stay here, under my guardianship, safe and controlled. Or take your inheritance and leave. Build something. Fail, maybe. But fail on your own terms." Clara stood. Her legs shook, but she locked her knees. "I'll need money, just enough to get started. Hire workers, fix what Victoria broke. You'll have it. I'll loan it against the estate's value. Standard terms, nothing predatory." He was already writing. "When do you want to leave?" "Tomorrow." The word came out before Clara could think about it. "No, today, now, before I lose my nerve." Blackmore looked up, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. Really smiled, not that cold, sharp thing he usually did. "Good," he said. "I'll arrange the carriage." The estate looked smaller than Clara remembered. Or maybe she'd gotten bigger. Harder. The carriage pulled up to a house that needed paint, gardens that needed weeding, fields that needed attention Victoria had never given them. Home. Broken and neglected. But home. Mrs. Carson stood in the doorway, her old face creasing with relief when she saw Clara step down. "Miss Clara, thank the—" She caught herself. "We heard what happened, in London. Heard Mrs. Victoria was arrested." "She was." Clara climbed the steps, breathing in air that smelled like childhood and her father's pipe smoke, even though that was impossible. "I'm back. To stay. To run things." Mrs. Carson's eyes widened. "Run things? But you're unmarried, young, a woman." "I know." Clara pushed open the door. The entrance hall was exactly as she'd left it, down to the portrait of her father watching from above the stairs. "But it's my estate now. Mine to manage or ruin. And I'd rather ruin it myself than let someone else do it for me." Behind her, Blackmore's men were already unloading her things. Not much. She'd refused to take more than she could carry. Clothes, books, her father's old surveying tools she'd found in the attic. Mrs. Carson wrung her hands. "The staff's down to just me and young Tom in the stables. Mrs. Victoria dismissed everyone else, said they were too expensive." "Then we'll hire them back, and more." Clara walked through rooms that echoed with emptiness. "I'll need a steward, someone who knows land management and isn't afraid of working for a woman." "That's a short list, miss." "Then we'll make do with who we can get." Clara stopped in the study doorway. Someone had cleaned it since the night she'd broken in. The forced drawer was fixed, the ledgers gone. Evidence now, locked in some courthouse. But the maps were still there. Her father's careful drawings of field boundaries, irrigation channels, crop rotations planned years in advance, She could do this, had to do this. Mrs. Carson, Clara said, send word to the tenants. Tell them I'm back and I want to meet with them, all of them, tomorrow morning. They won't come, miss, not for a woman. They will if they want to keep their leases. When Clara turned, Victoria's gone. I'm in charge. And the first thing I'm doing is reviewing every arrangement she made. If they want to keep their farms, they'll show up. Mrs. Carson looked uncertain, but nodded. I'll send Tom round with messages. That night, Clara slept in her old bedroom. The mattress was the same, the window faced the same fields, but everything felt different, foreign. She was different. The girl who'd lived here before, the one who'd tried to be invisible, who'd survived by not making waves, that girl was gone. In her place was someone Clara was still learning to recognize. She didn't sleep much, spent the dark hours going through papers she'd had sent from London, reviewing what Victoria had done to the estate in 2 years of mismanagement. Rents raised beyond reason, maintenance ignored, tenant complaints dismissed, fields left fallow that should have been planted. It was worse than Clara had feared, and somehow, seeing it laid out in numbers and neglect, it made her angry instead of afraid. Her father had built something beautiful, and Victoria had nearly destroyed it out of spite. Clara wouldn't let that stand. By dawn, she had a plan. Rough, probably doomed to fail, but a plan nonetheless. The tenants came at 9, a ragged group of 15 farmers and their families. They looked suspicious, hostile even, gathering in the main hall like prisoners waiting for sentencing. Clara stood at the top of the stairs where her father used to address them. She'd dressed carefully, her plainest dress, her hair pulled back, nothing that screamed London or society. She needed to look like someone who belonged here. Thank you for coming, she said. Her voice echoed. I know you didn't have to. I know most of you probably think this is a waste of time. Murmurs of agreement. One man, Hoskins, she remembered, he ran the eastern parcels, crossed his arms. No offense, Miss Whitlock, but we came because we were told our leases were under review. That sounds like a threat. It is. Clara didn't flinch. Because half of you are 3 months behind on rent that Victoria raised to unreasonable levels. The other half are current, but working land that's been neglected so badly, it'll take years to recover. That's not sustainable. Not for you, not for this estate. More murmuring. Hoskins' scowl deepened. So you're evicting us? That's your big plan? No, I'm renegotiating. Clara descended the stairs slowly. Here's what I know. My father charged fair rents based on land quality and crop yields. He maintained irrigation, provided seed loans, and worked with you when harvests failed. Victoria did none of that. She raised rents, cut maintenance, and threatened eviction for anyone who complained. She reached the bottom step, stood at eye level with men twice her age who'd been farming this land since before she was born. I'm not my father, Clara said. I don't have his experience or his relationships with you, but I do have his ledgers, and I know what fair looks like. She pulled out papers. I'm offering new leases, rents at my father's old rates, 5-year terms instead of annual, maintenance guarantees in writing, and profit sharing on yields above historical average. Silence. Absolute silence. Then Hoskins laughed. Profit sharing? Miss Whitlock, with respect, that's insane. No landowner shares profit with tenants. Then I'll be the first. Clara met his eyes. My father always said an estate is only as strong as the people working it. You make money, I make money. You fail, we both fail. That's partnership, not exploitation. It's also suicide for you, another farmer said. Martin, from the southern fields. Landowners don't do this. Society won't accept it. Society doesn't accept me anyway. Clara smiled, bitter. I'm an unmarried woman running an estate alone. I'm already breaking every rule. Might as well break the ones that actually matter. More silence. Then Mrs. Parsons, who ran the dairy with her 3 daughters, stepped forward. The irrigation channel's on the north side, she said. They've been broken for 8 months. Mrs. Victoria said she'd fix them, then never did. We lost half our grazing land to flooding. I'll have them repaired by end of month, Clara said. You have my word. Words don't mean much. Mrs. Victoria gave plenty of those. Then let me prove it with action. Clara looked around the room. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to give me one season, one harvest cycle. If I fail, if I can't deliver on what I'm promising, you can leave. No penalty, no back rent. I'll even help you find new situations." Hoskins squinted at her. "You're serious. Completely. Why? What do you get out of this?" Clara thought about Victoria's face, twisted with hate, about Ashford's wet smile, about all the people who'd looked at her like she was property to be managed or disposed of. "I get to prove I can do this," she said quietly. "That's enough." The farmers exchanged looks, some skeptical, some curious. Mrs. Parsons nodded slowly. "One season," she said, "but we want those irrigation channels fixed first. Proof you mean what you say." "Done." Clara held out her hand. "Deal?" Mrs. Parsons looked at it like it might bite. Then she shook, her grip work rough and strong. One by one, the others followed. Not all of them. 3 families left without agreeing, but 12 stayed. 12 families willing to take a chance on a girl who had no business running an estate. Clara stood in the empty hall after they'd gone and felt something she hadn't felt in 2 years. Not safety, not security, but possibility. The next 3 months were brutal. Clara woke before dawn and worked past dark, learning by doing and failing and doing again. She hired a steward, an old man named Patterson, who'd been dismissed by Victoria for insubordination, which apparently meant he told her she was managing the land into the ground. He knew more about farming than Clara ever would, and he wasn't shy about correcting her mistakes. "You can't plant wheat there," he said on her second day, pointing at a map where Clara had marked fields. "Soil's too acidic. You'll get maybe half yield." "Then what do I plant?" "Rye. Or turnips if you want a rotation crop." He looked at her like she was an idiot. "Your father would have known that." "My father's dead. I'm what you've got." Clara erased her marks and started over. "Show me." Patterson did, grudgingly at first, then with something like approval as Clara proved she could learn. She spent days writing the estate boundaries, checking irrigation, talking to tenants about yields and problems. Her hands blistered from holding reins. Her legs ached from hours in the saddle. She fell into bed exhausted every night and woke up to do it again. And slowly, painfully slowly, things started to improve. The irrigation channels got fixed. Not quickly, not perfectly, but they got done. Crops went in. Rents came in at the new lower rates. And for the first time in months, Clara could pay workers without borrowing more from Blackmore. She kept meticulous records, writing everything down the way her father had taught her. Every expense, every repair, every tenant complaint and resolution. Patterson called her obsessive. Clara called it survival. News from London came in sporadic letters from Pemberton. Victoria's trial was proceeding, slowly, with all the bureaucratic delays money and influence could buy, but proceeding. Lord Ashford had been questioned but not charged. Apparently selling a woman for property wasn't quite illegal if you phrased it as a marriage arrangement. But his reputation was destroyed. The ton had dropped him completely. Clara read the updates and felt nothing. That life, London, society, the desperate fight for survival, it felt like it had happened to someone else. She was different now. Harder, more certain. She was Clara Whitlock, estate manager, and she was going to make this work if it killed her. Word spread. Clara knew it would. An unmarried woman running an estate, offering profit sharing to tenants, actually laboring in fields instead of managing from a parlor. It was scandalous enough that neighboring estates started taking notice. Most of the attention was contemptuous. Lord Pembroke, whose land bordered Clara's to the north, made pointed comments at his gatherings about young women playing at business they don't understand. Lady Morrison sent a letter suggesting Clara might be happier seeking a husband to guide her efforts. Clara ignored them all. She had work to do and no time for people who'd written her off already. But then Lord Carrington showed up. He arrived unannounced, riding up to the main house on a gray gelding that probably cost more than Clara's entire stable. He was young, maybe 30, with the kind of easy confidence that came from inherited wealth and good breeding. Clara met him in the yard, dirty from inspecting the Southfield drainage, her hair escaping its pins. "Lord Carrington," she said, because Mrs. Carson had warned her he was coming. "Can I help you?" He dismounted with practiced ease. "Miss Whitlock, I've heard interesting things about your estate management. Thought I'd see for myself." See what? A woman making a fool of herself? See if the profit-sharing model actually works. He smiled, and it was surprisingly genuine. I've been arguing with my steward for months about tenant arrangements. He says traditional rent structures are the only sustainable option. But if you're making it work, I am. Clara gestured toward the house. Would you like to see the numbers? They spent 2 hours in the study, Clara walking Carrington through her ledgers, explaining the logic behind every decision. He asked sharp questions, challenged her assumptions, but not dismissively, like he was genuinely trying to understand. Your margins are thin, he said finally. They'll improve as yields increase. The land was neglected for 2 years. It needs time to recover. And if they don't improve? If a bad season wipes out your reserves? Clara had thought about this. Nightmares about it, honestly. Then I fail, but at least the tenants won't be destroyed with me. They'll have kept more of their profits, have savings to find new situations. Carrington leaned back, studying her. You're not doing this for profit. I'm doing it to prove I can. Clara met his eyes. And because it's right. My father believed people who work the land deserve to benefit from it. I believe that too. Most landowners would call that naive. Most landowners didn't grow up watching their stepmothers bleed estates dry. Clara's voice was sharp. I'd rather be naive and fair than rich and cruel. Carrington nodded slowly. Then he stood. I'd like to visit again in 3 months, see how the harvest goes. If your model works, really works, I might implement something similar. Clara blinked. Seriously? Seriously. The current system's broken. Everyone knows it, but most people are too afraid to change it. He held out his hand. Maybe a woman who's already ruined her reputation is exactly the person to show us a better way. Clara shook his hand, feeling something fragile and impossible bloom in her chest. Hope. Actual hope. Harvest came in early September, and Clara spent 3 straight days in the fields with the workers, helping load wagons, checking quality, settling disputes. Patterson kept telling her she didn't need to be there, that landowners didn't do manual labor. Clara ignored him. She wanted to see this through, wanted to understand every step of the process her father had managed for 20 years. The yields were mixed. Some fields exceeded historical averages. Mrs. Parsons's dairy pastures, Hoskins' eastern wheat. Others fell short, still recovering from Victoria's neglect. But overall, they came in at 90% of what her father had achieved in his best years. Clara sat in the study at midnight, calculating profit shares, and realized they'd actually done it. Made money. Not a lot. Her own take was barely enough to survive on after repairs and wages. But they'd turned a profit. Actually turned a profit. She put her head down on the desk and laughed until she cried. The profit-sharing payments went out in October. Clara delivered them herself, riding to each tenant farm with envelopes of money they hadn't expected. Mrs. Parsons opened hers and went pale. This can't be right. This is... Miss Whitlock, this is nearly double what I'd normally clear. That's because your yields were 20% above historical average. That's the agreement. You profit. I profit. But Mrs. Parsons looked at this money like it might disappear. This is real? It's real, Clara smiled. You earned it. Word spread faster than wildfire. By the end of the week, Clara had 3 neighboring tenant farmers asking if they could transfer leases to work her land. By the end of the month, Lord Carrington sent a letter saying he was implementing a modified version of her system. And by November, when Clara rode into the village for supplies, people who'd previously crossed the street to avoid her actually nodded in greeting. It was small, it was fragile, but it was real. Clara Whitlock was earning respect. Not because of her father's name or Blackmore's protection or marriage to anyone, because she'd built something, actually built something that worked. The letter from Pemberton came in December, just as the first snow started falling. Clara read it standing in the study, Patterson waiting for her to finish so they could discuss spring planting. Victoria had been convicted. Fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, 7 years in prison. All her assets seized to repay what she'd stolen. And Clara's guardianship was officially dissolved. She was legally independent, completely, totally free. Clara set down the letter carefully. Her hands weren't shaking. She wasn't crying, wasn't celebrating. She just felt tired. Relieved, but tired. Good news? Patterson asked. Victoria's in prison. I'm free. Clara looked at the map spread across her father's desk. We can move forward with the expansion, buy the Whitmore parcels, extend the southern irrigation. Patterson's eyebrows rose. You're staying? Running this permanently? Why wouldn't I? Thought maybe you'd want to go back to London, society. Now that you're cleared of all that scandal, I'm not cleared of anything. I'm just not imprisoned by it. Clara traced a field boundary on the map. This is where I belong. This is what I'm good at. Why would I leave? Patterson smiled, rare and approving. Your father would be proud. The words hit harder than Clara expected. She swallowed against sudden tightness in her throat. You think so? I know so. He always said you had the mind for it. Just needed the chance to prove it. Patterson tapped the map. You've done that. More than done that. You've improved on what he built. Clara looked around the study. At the ledgers that balanced, the maps that showed healthy fields, the respect she'd earned inch by painful inch. She'd done it. Actually done it. Not perfectly. Not smoothly. But she'd taken an estate Victoria had nearly destroyed and rebuilt it into something sustainable. Something fair. Something her father would recognize. Spring planting, Clara said, pushing down emotion to focus on work. Let's plan for the Whitmore parcels. Assuming the purchase goes through, a knock interrupted them. Mrs. Carson appeared, looking flustered. Miss Clara, you have a visitor. Tell them I'm busy. Unless it's Carrington, he can wait until... It's the Duke of Blackmore. Clara's heart did something complicated. She hadn't seen Blackmore since the day she'd left London. They'd corresponded, brief letters about legal matters, loan repayments, court updates. But he hadn't visited, hadn't checked on her. She told herself she preferred it that way, preferred independence. But seeing him now, walking into the study with snow on his shoulders and that same cold, certain expression, Clara felt something she'd been carefully not feeling for 6 months. Relief. Dangerous, complicated relief. Your Grace, she said formally. This is unexpected. I was passing through, thought I'd check on my investment. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the organized chaos of maps and ledgers. You look well. I look exhausted, but thank you. Clara gestured to Patterson. This is my steward, Mr. Patterson. He's been teaching me everything my father didn't get to. Blackmore nodded to Patterson, who excused himself with obvious reluctance. Alone, the study suddenly felt smaller. I heard about the harvest, Blackmore said. 90% of historical yields. Profit-sharing payments delivered. Tenants staying instead of leaving. He almost smiled. You did it. We did it. Your loan made it possible. My loan was money. You did the actual work. He moved to the window, looking out at snow-covered fields. How much longer until you're self-sufficient? 2 more seasons at this rate. 3 if we expand. Clara joined him at the window. Why? Are you calling in the debt? No, I'm impressed. He looked at her then, really looked, and Clara saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Warmth. Actual warmth. You left London 6 months ago looking like you might break. Now you look like you could break anyone who tried to hurt you. Clara thought about that. About the girl who'd stood in this study being slapped by Victoria, powerless and trapped. About who she was now. I learned, she said quietly, that I'm stronger than I thought, that I don't need saving, that I can stand alone. Good. Blackmore's voice was soft. That's what I hoped you'd learn. They stood in silence, watching snow fall on land Clara had fought to reclaim. Thank you, she said finally, for the loan, for the protection, for letting me go when I needed to. You would have found a way without me. He turned from the window. But you're welcome. He left the next morning, riding back to London through snow that was rapidly getting worse. Clara watched from the study window until he disappeared, feeling something shift in her chest. She'd proven she could stand alone. Had rebuilt her life, earned respect, created something real. But standing alone and wanting to stand alone weren't the same thing. Clara pushed the thought away and returned to work. Spring planting wouldn't plan itself, and she had an estate to run. Spring came late that year, Lingering frost that kept Clara and Patterson arguing over planting schedules until March finally broke warm. The Whitmore purchase went through, adding another 100 acres to Clara's holdings. It meant more workers, more risk, more nights lying awake doing calculations that never quite added up the way she wanted. But it also meant expansion, growth, proof that what she'd built could sustain itself. Clara stood at the edge of the new fields on a morning that smelled like rain and turned earth, watching workers prepare soil that hadn't been properly tended in a decade. The previous owner had let it go fallow, too old and too tired to maintain it. Clara planned to bring it back. Rye this season to restore nutrients, then wheat next year if the soil recovered. "You're thinking too hard again." Patterson appeared beside her, his weathered face creased with something like amusement. "I can hear it from the house." "I'm thinking the right amount, which is constantly." Clara pointed to the eastern section. "That drainage is going to be a problem if we get heavy rain." "Already ordered the materials, should be here by week's end." Clara nodded, still calculating. The expansion had depleted her reserves. One bad season and she'd be in serious trouble. But playing it safe meant stagnation, and stagnation meant slow death. Her father had taught her that. "Miss Clara!" Young Tom from the stables came running across the field, waving a letter. Came by special courier, marked urgent. Clara's stomach dropped. Urgent never meant good news. She took the letter, recognized the Blackmore seal, and felt her heart do that complicated thing it had been doing every time she thought about him. She'd paid off half the loan already, sent detailed accounting with every payment. Their correspondence had been strictly business for 8 months now, professional, distant, safe. So why was he writing urgent? She broke the seal. "Miss Whitlock, your presence is requested in London immediately. Legal matter regarding the estate requires your testimony. Details enclosed. I've sent a carriage. It should arrive within the hour. Blackmore." Clara read it twice, then looked at the enclosure. Legal summons. Victoria was appealing her conviction, claiming new evidence of Clara's instability and Blackmore's undue influence. The courts wanted Clara to testify. "Problem?" Patterson asked. "Victoria." Clara folded the letter. "She's fighting the conviction, wants me in London to testify." "Can't Pemberton handle it?" "Apparently not." Clara looked at her fields, her workers, everything she'd built that would need managing while she was gone. "How long can we manage without me?" Patterson snorted. "Longer than you think. Place won't fall apart in a week, Clara. We know what we're doing." It was the first time he'd called her Clara instead of Miss Whitlock. Something about that steadied her more than reassurance. "A week, then," she said. "Maybe less if I can make the testimony quick." The carriage arrived exactly when Blackmore said it would. Black and expensive, and completely inappropriate for country roads. Clara packed quickly. Her plainest dresses, her ledgers in case she needed documentation, her father's old compass because it felt like a talisman. Mrs. Carson fussed over her like she was heading to war instead of court. "You'll show them," the old housekeeper said, pressing food into Clara's hands. "Show them what you've built, what you are." "I'm just going to testify." "You're going to remind them that Thomas Whitlock's daughter is nobody's victim." Mrs. Carson's eyes were fierce. "Make him proud." The journey to London took 2 days. Clara spent it reviewing facts, preparing testimony, trying not to think about seeing Blackmore again. She'd gotten good at not thinking about him, pushed it down every time his name came up in correspondence, every time she caught herself wondering what he'd think of her progress. She was independent now, successful, didn't need his protection or approval. But wanting wasn't the same as needing, and Clara was tired of pretending she didn't want. London hit her like a wall of noise and smoke and too many people. After 8 months of country quiet, the city felt overwhelming, dangerous. Clara pressed herself into the carriage corner and watched familiar streets pass by, feeling like a stranger in a place that had nearly destroyed her. Blackmore's townhouse looked the same. Clara climbed the steps she'd last descended as a terrified girl, and now she was, what? Still terrified, maybe, but different, harder. Mrs. Phillips opened the door before Clara could knock. "Miss Whitlock, His Grace is in his study. He's expecting you." Clara followed familiar corridors to a door she'd stood outside once before, bleeding and broken. She knocked. "Come in." Blackmore sat behind his desk, papers spread before him, looking exactly as he had 8 months ago. Cold, controlled, untouchable. Then he looked up, and something in his expression cracked. "You look different," he said. Clara touched her face self-consciously. "I've been working outdoors. The sun? No, not that." He stood, coming around the desk. "You look solid, certain, like you finally figured out who you are." "I'm still figuring it out, but I'm closer than I was." Clara stayed near the door, maintaining distance. "The summons said Victoria's appealing. How is that possible? The evidence was overwhelming, which is why she's not challenging the fraud conviction. She's challenging the guardianship removal." Blackmore handed her documents. "She's claiming I coerced you, that you were vulnerable, I took advantage, and your entire testimony was influenced by my control over you." Clara's laugh was sharp. "That's insane. You let me leave. Let me build my own life." Which she's spinning as abandonment. Claims I used you to destroy her, then discarded you once you were no longer useful. And people believe that? Some do. Enough that the courts agreed to hear the appeal. He leaned against the desk. "She's been writing letters from prison, building sympathy. The poor widow persecuted by a powerful duke and his unstable ward. It's effective." Clara felt rage building, hot and familiar. "So what do we do?" "You testify, tell the truth, show them what you've built without me." His voice was flat. "The courts want to see if you're truly independent or if you're still under my influence. I haven't seen you in 8 months. Which helps our case, but Victoria's lawyers will argue that absence doesn't mean independence, that I could still be controlling you financially, emotionally." He stopped, something crossing his face too fast to read. "They'll question everything. Your choices, your competence, your relationship with me." Clara's throat went tight. "What relationship? We don't have, don't we?" The question was quiet, dangerous. "You write me every month. Detailed reports on the estate, the tenants, your progress. I read every word. Reply to every letter. Send advice you never asked for and you implement anyway. That's business. The loan's been half repaid. You don't need my advice anymore. Haven't needed it since June." He moved closer. "So why do you keep writing?" Clara's heart was hammering. "Why do you keep replying?" Silence stretched between them. Heavy, charged, full of things neither would say. "Victoria will use this," Blackmore said finally. "Whatever this is, she'll twist it into proof I'm controlling you. Then maybe we should stop. Stop writing. Stop." Clara gestured helplessly. "Stop whatever this is that I can't name." "Is that what you want?" "No." The words screamed through Clara's mind. But what she wanted didn't matter, did it? She'd spent 8 months proving she could stand alone. She wasn't about to throw that away for what? Feeling she couldn't afford? "What I want is irrelevant," Clara said. "Victoria in prison is what matters. Keeping what I've built is what matters." "Then we focus on that." Blackmore's voice went cold again, professional. "Testimonies tomorrow. Pemberton will prepare you. After, if you want to return home immediately, I'll arrange it." "Good. Fine." Clara turned toward the door, throat aching. "I should rest. It's been a long journey." "Clara." She stopped but didn't turn around. "You've done well," Blackmore said quietly. "Better than well. Your father would be—" He paused. "I'm proud of you. For what that's worth. Everything. Nothing." Clara didn't know anymore. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said, and left before her voice could break. Court the next morning was packed. Clara sat in a witness box that felt like a cage, looking out at hundreds of faces watching her with avid curiosity. Victoria sat across the room in prison dress, her face carefully composed into suffering nobility. She looked smaller than Clara remembered, older, but her eyes were the same, cold and calculating and utterly without remorse. Pemberton stood. "Miss Whitlock, please tell the court your current occupation." "I manage my father's estate, land, tenants, crop planning, everything required to run a profitable agricultural property." "And who appointed you to this position?" "No one. I inherited the land. I chose to manage it myself." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Women didn't manage estates, didn't choose that kind of life. "Please describe your living situation," Pemberton continued. I live on the estate, in my family home, with my housekeeper and steward. I employ 15 workers and contract with 12 tenant families. And the Duke of Blackmore, where does he fit in this arrangement? He doesn't. He provided a loan to help me rebuild after Victoria's mismanagement. I'm repaying it. Beyond that, we have no relationship. The lie tasted bitter. But it was technically true. Letters weren't a relationship. Wanting wasn't a relationship. Victoria's lawyer stood, a sharp-faced man named Whitmore who looked like he enjoyed cruelty. Miss Whitlock, you claim independence, yet you live on property purchased with the Duke's money, manage an estate using his financial backing, and run your entire operation with his ongoing support. Is that accurate? The loan is standard, available to anyone with collateral. But you're not anyone. You're a young, unmarried woman who the Duke took under his protection in a very public, very scandalous manner. Whitmore smiled. Some might say you're still under that protection, just in a different form. Some would be wrong. Would they? Let's examine your correspondence with His Grace. You write him monthly, yes? Clara's chest tightened. Yes. Detailed letters about your estate management, your decisions, your progress. You send these to him unprompted? Yes, but... And he replies? Offers advice? Guidance? Sometimes. But I don't always... So you do receive his guidance. Regular, ongoing guidance from the man who removed you from your legal guardian's care, paid for your independence, and continues to advise you. Whitmore looked at the judges. That doesn't sound like independence. That sounds like a different form of control. It's not control, Clara said, voice sharp. It's correspondence between two people who respect each other's respect? Or something more? Whitmore pulled out papers. I have testimony from servants who've observed His Grace's visits to your estate. Visits that lasted overnight, unchaperoned. Would you like to explain those? The courtroom erupted. Clara felt ice flood her veins. He visited once, during a storm. He stayed in the guest room with Mrs. Carson present the entire time. One time you're aware of, but servants have testified to multiple visits. Late at night, leaving early morning. Whitmore's smile widened. You understand how this looks, Miss Whitlock? A powerful duke, a vulnerable young woman, an arrangement that benefits him considerably. Benefits him how? Clara's voice rose. I've given him nothing but loan repayments. There's no benefit to, isn't there? A young woman under his influence, financially dependent, grateful for his protection. Some might call that a very advantageous arrangement for a man of His Grace's position. Clara stood, fury overwhelming caution. He's never touched, never demanded anything, never used his position for any purpose except helping me survive when everyone else wanted me gone. Including your stepmother, who you've now successfully imprisoned based largely on His Grace's influence. Based on evidence, documented fraud, conspiracy, evidence you obtained by breaking into your stepmother's home. Evidence that conveniently supported the Duke's narrative. Evidence that gave him control over a substantial estate through his financial arrangement with you. Whitmore looked at the judges. I submit that Miss Whitlock is not independent. She's simply traded one guardian for another. Mrs. Victoria Whitlock may have been harsh, but at least she had legal authority. The Duke of Blackmore has no such authority, which makes his ongoing control over Miss Whitlock considerably more concerning. The courtroom exploded into arguments. The judges called for order, and Clara stood frozen, watching her independence, her hard-won, painful, desperately earned independence, get torn apart by a lawyer who'd never spent a day working land or fighting to survive. That's not true, she said, but her voice was lost in the noise. Blackmore stood. He'd been silent through the entire proceeding, watching from the back. Now he moved forward, his face carved from ice. Enough, he said. One word, but the room quieted. The lead judge frowned. Your Grace, this is highly irregular. So is allowing counsel to fabricate a relationship that doesn't exist. Blackmore's voice was cold, absolute. For the record, I have visited Miss Whitlock's estate exactly once, during which I stayed in a guest room and discussed business matters. Our correspondence is professional. My loan is documented and repaid according to standard terms. And my influence on her decisions extends exactly as far as she allows, which is to say, barely at all. He looked at Clara then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Miss Whitlock is the most independent person I know, he continued. She's built a successful estate from ruins, implemented innovative tenant arrangements that have tripled productivity, earned respect in a community that would have preferred she disappear. She's done all this despite society's condemnation, despite financial hardship, despite every obstacle placed in her path. He turned to the judges. If that's not independence, I don't know what is. Whitmore stood. Your Grace's testimony is touching, but irrelevant. The question isn't whether Miss Whitlock has achieved success, it's whether she achieved it through her own will or yours. Mine, Clara said. Every head turned. I did it through my will, my choices, my work. She looked at the judges. The Duke gave me a loan, that's all. Everything else, every decision, every risk, every failure and success. That was me. Alone. Except you're not alone, Whitmore pressed. You write him. Seek his advice. Some might say you're emotionally dependent, even if not financially. I write him because I want to. Clara's voice rang clear. Because he's the only person who believed I could do this when everyone else thought I'd fail. That's not dependence. That's gratitude. And yes, maybe it's more than that. Maybe I write him because She stopped, throat tight. The truth hovered there, dangerous and terrifying. Because you what, Miss Whitlock? Whitmore asked. Clara looked at Blackmore, at his gray eyes and his cold expression and the carefully controlled distance he'd maintained since the moment they'd met. She could lie, could protect herself, protect them both, play it safe. Or she could choose honesty, choose risk, choose him. Because I care about him, Clara said quietly. Because 8 months ago he saved my life, and I've spent every day since trying to prove I was worth saving. I write him because his opinion matters, because I want him to be proud of me, because, her voice cracked, because I'm in love with him, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not. The courtroom went silent. Blackmore's expression didn't change, but Clara saw his hands tighten on the railing in front of him. So yes, Clara continued, looking at Whitmore now, I'm not completely independent, not emotionally, but I'm in love with him by choice, not because he forced it or manipulated it or bought it. I chose this. The same way I chose to leave London, chose to rebuild my estate, chose to fight Victoria instead of giving up. She met the judge's eyes. That's what independence means, not being alone, not needing no one, but making your own choices about who you let matter. Silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then Blackmore moved, walked straight through the courtroom, past the lawyers, past the judges, and stopped in front of Clara. You're sure? He asked quietly. Because there's no taking that back. I'm sure. Clara's heart hammered. Are you? Instead of answering, he kissed her. Right there, in front of the judges, the lawyers, Victoria, and half of London's society. He kissed her like she was the only person in the room, like he'd been holding back for 8 months and finally couldn't anymore. When he pulled back, Clara's knees were shaking, and the courtroom was in chaos. I'll take that as a yes, she managed. I've been in love with you since you stood in my cousin's library with blood on your face and told me you weren't running. His voice was rough. Everything since then has been me trying to let you go, trying to give you the independence you deserved. But if you're choosing this, choosing me, then I'm done pretending I don't want it too. The lead judge banged his gavel. Order! This is completely inappropriate. Probably, Blackmore said, not taking his eyes off Clara. But I don't particularly care. He turned to the judges. For the record, I'm proposing marriage. Right now. In front of witnesses. So there's no question of coercion or undue influence. Miss Whitlock can accept or refuse completely freely. Clara's breath caught. You're insane. That's the worst proposal I've ever heard. It's the only one you'll get from me. He held out his hand. So what's your answer? Clara looked at his hand, at the calluses she knew were there from writing and work he didn't need to do but did anyway. At the man who'd let her go when she needed freedom and was now asking her to choose him, not because she needed saving, but because she wanted him. Yes, she said, but I'm keeping the estate and the tenant arrangements and my independence. I wouldn't want you any other way. He slipped a ring onto her finger. She had no idea where it came from, but it fit perfectly. We'll figure out the details later. The courtroom was pandemonium now. Whitmore was objecting, the judges were arguing, and Victoria sat frozen, her face white with rage and disbelief. Clara looked at her stepmother and felt nothing. No fear, no hatred. Just pity for a woman who'd spent so much energy on cruelty and ended up with nothing. "You lose," Clara said quietly, knowing Victoria could hear her across the room. "Completely." The judges called for order eventually. The proceedings continued, though the outcome was predetermined now. Clara's testimony stood. The evidence of Victoria's fraud was irrefutable, and the appeal, Victoria's last desperate attempt to salvage something, was denied. Victoria Whitlock would serve her full sentence. 7 years in prison for destroying what Thomas Whitlock had built and trying to destroy his daughter. It was over. Actually, finally over. Clara and Blackmore left the courthouse together through a crowd of shouting reporters and scandalized society members. Someone threw something. Clara didn't see what. Blackmore shielded her until they reached the carriage. Inside, finally alone, Clara started laughing. "That was the worst possible way to get engaged," she said. "Probably. But it worked." Blackmore was smiling, actually smiling, warm and real. "You know society will never accept this. They'll call you a schemer, say you seduced me for power. Let them. I stopped caring what society thinks about 8 months ago." Clara looked at the ring on her finger. Simple gold band, no stones. Perfect. "Do you care?" "No, haven't for years." He pulled her close. "But I care that you're sure. This changes things. We can't what? Run separate estates? Have separate lives?" Clara shook her head. "I'm not giving up what I've built. I told you that." "I know. I wouldn't ask you to." He was quiet for a moment. "We'll need to figure out how this works. Your estate and mine, your tenants and mine. How to merge our lives without you losing yours." "Together," Clara said. "We figure it out together. Isn't that the whole point?" "I suppose it is." He kissed her again, softer this time. "For the record, I've never done this before. The partnership thing. Might be terrible at it." "Good. Me neither. We can be terrible together." They rode back to Blackmore's townhouse, and Clara spent the next week in a blur of planning. Not wedding planning, that could wait. Estate planning, how to integrate their properties, their management styles, their lives. Blackmore's steward was scandalized by Clara's tenant arrangements. Clara was horrified by Blackmore's traditional rent structures. They argued for 3 days straight before finding a compromise that satisfied neither and would probably work perfectly. "You're stubborn," Blackmore said after a particularly heated discussion about profit margins. "You're inflexible," Clara shot back. "This is going to be a disaster." "Absolutely," Clara grinned. "But at least it'll be interesting." Lord Carrington visited on the 4th day, ostensibly to congratulate them, but really to gossip about the trial. "All of London's talking about it," he said, accepting tea in Blackmore's study. The dramatic testimony, the public proposal, Victoria's face when the appeal was denied. It's the scandal of the decade. "Wonderful," Clara said dryly. "Exactly what I wanted." "Actually, it's perfect." Carrington leaned forward. "You've become famous. The woman who rebuilt her estate, defied society, and won. Do you know how many other landowners are asking me about your tenant model now? How many women are writing asking how they can do the same?" Clara blinked. "What?" "You've started something, whether you meant to or not." He pulled out letters. "Look, Lady Morrison's daughter wants to manage her inheritance instead of marrying. Mrs. Pemberton is implementing profit sharing on her family's estate. Even Lord Ashworth, the most traditional landowner I know, is reconsidering his tenant arrangements." Clara took the letters, reading them with growing disbelief. Women she'd never met, writing about following her example, about fighting for independence, about building something real. "I didn't mean to start anything," she said. "I was just trying to survive." "The best movements start that way." Blackmore looked at the letters over her shoulder. "You showed them it was possible. That's all it takes sometimes." Clara thought about the girl she'd been a year ago, trapped, terrified, convinced she'd never escape Victoria's control. If someone had told her then that she'd end up here, successful, engaged by choice, accidentally starting a movement, she'd have thought they were insane. But here she was. "I should write back," she said. "Answer their questions. Help if I can. Careful, Blackmore said. That's how you end up with more responsibility than you planned for. Good. I work better with too much responsibility. Clara stood, already planning. I need to get back to the estate. Spring planning's nearly done, but Patterson will want me there for the final decisions. And if we're merging properties, I need to assess your land, meet your tenants. Slow down. Blackmore caught her hand. The estate can wait a few more days. Let Patterson handle it. He's capable. I know he's capable, but it's my... Clara stopped, took a breath. You're right. I need to trust him. Trust that everything won't fall apart if I'm not there constantly. That's called delegation, important skill for landowners. And wives. The word sent a flutter through Clara's chest. Wife. She was going to be someone's wife. Had spent so long fighting against that future that she'd forgotten it could be a choice instead of a trap. When? She asked. The wedding. When do you want? Whenever you want. Next week? Next year? Whenever you're ready. Clara thought about that. About white dresses and society weddings and everything she'd been taught marriages should be. Then she thought about what she actually wanted. Small, she said. Just us and a few people who actually matter. Mrs. Carson, Patterson, Pemberton, maybe Carrington since he's been supportive. No society, no spectacle, just... She met Blackmore's eyes. Just honest. That sounds perfect. He kissed her hand. Though you should probably tell your tenants. They'll want to know their landlord's getting married. Our tenants. If we're doing this, they're ours. Both estates, both sets of tenants. Full partnership. Something in Blackmore's expression softened. Full partnership. I can work with that. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church near Clara's estate. Mrs. Carson cried. Patterson looked pleased in his gruff way. Pemberton handled the legal documents with professional efficiency. And Carrington gave a toast about revolution that made Clara laugh until she cried. Blackmore had wanted to give her jewels, expensive gifts, things befitting a duchess. Clara had asked for a new irrigation system for the western fields instead. He'd looked at her like she was insane, then ordered the best system money could buy. The first year was chaos. Learning to run 2 estates, integrate their management styles, and actually live together without killing each other proved harder than defeating Victoria. They argued constantly about tenant arrangements, crop rotations, repair priorities, everything. But they also built something neither could have built alone. Blackmore's resources, combined with Clara's innovation, created a model that other estates started copying. Profit sharing spread. Traditional rent structures began shifting. And slowly, painfully slowly, the system Clara's father had believed in started taking root. Clara became sought after for advice. Women wrote her constantly, asking how to manage land, how to fight for independence, how to survive in a world built to keep them powerless. She answered every letter, sometimes staying up past midnight to help strangers she'd never meet. You're going to exhaust yourself, Blackmore said one night, finding her asleep at her desk with half-finished correspondence scattered around her. They need help, Clara mumbled, not fully awake. They're trapped like I was. So teach them, but sustainably. He carried her to bed. You can't save everyone. I can try. That's what I love about you. Also what terrifies me. 2 years after their marriage, Clara stood on the hill overlooking her father's estate. Their estate now, hers and Blackmore's. The fields were green and gold, workers moving through crops that would exceed yields again this season. Tenant families she'd fought for thrived. Mrs. Parsons' daughter was studying land management. Hoskins' son was implementing profit sharing on his own small farm. And Patterson had trained 2 apprentices who'd go on to manage other estates using Clara's model. It wasn't perfect. Some seasons failed, some tenants left, some of society still called Clara's methods naive or dangerous. But it was working. Actually, undeniably working. Blackmore joined her on the hill, silent company. Thinking, he asked, about my father, about what he'd think of all this. Clara gestured to the fields. I've changed so much of what he built. Do you think he'd approve? I think he'd be proud you built on his foundation instead of just preserving it. Blackmore slipped an arm around her waist. Progress requires change. He knew that. Clara leaned into him, watching the sun set over land she'd fought to reclaim. Victoria's being released next month. Early release for good behavior. I know, Pemberton told me. I don't know how I feel about it. Clara was quiet for a moment. Part of me wants to hate her, but mostly I just feel nothing. She's irrelevant now. The person who could hurt me doesn't exist anymore. Because you're not that person anymore either. Clara thought about the girl who'd stood in this same spot 3 years ago, trapped and powerless, and convinced she'd never escape. That girl had died the night Blackmore stepped between her and Victoria. The woman who'd been born in her place was harder, stronger, certain, not perfect. Clara still woke up sometimes in a panic, convinced everything would be taken away. Still pushed herself too hard, worked too much, tried to control things she couldn't. Still argued with Blackmore about management decisions and delegation and trust. But she was free. Actually, completely free. Not because someone had rescued her, because she'd saved herself, then chosen to build something with someone she loved. That was the difference. Choice instead of necessity. Partnership instead of ownership. I want to expand, Clara said suddenly. Buy the Ashford lands. They're being sold off to cover his debts. If we purchase them, we can implement our model on a larger scale. Show it works beyond just our estates. Blackmore was quiet. Then, that's ambitious, expensive, risky. I know, but isn't that the point? Taking risks, building something bigger than ourselves? It is. He kissed the top of her head. Let's do it. They purchased the Ashford land 6 months later. It was insane, financially precarious, and absolutely the right decision. Within 2 years, they'd transformed properties that had been dying under traditional management into thriving, profitable estates. Other landowners noticed, started implementing changes. The old system didn't fall overnight. Clara wasn't naive enough to think it would. But cracks appeared. Alternatives emerged. And women who'd been told their only value was marriage and silence started asking different questions, started demanding different futures. Clara wrote a book, not a memoir. She wasn't ready to relive everything in that much detail, but a practical guide to estate management and tenant relations. It sold modestly at first, then became essential reading for anyone trying to implement reform. Blackmore teased her about becoming famous. Clara pointed out he was the one who'd started this by publicly proposing in a courtroom. Fair point, he admitted, but you're the one who turned it into a movement. I'm just doing what my father taught me, treating people fairly, managing land sustainably, building something that lasts. Your father taught you that, but you're teaching others. That's different. That's legacy. Legacy. Clara had never thought about it that way. She'd been too busy surviving, then building, then fighting to expand. But looking back, she could see the pattern. The girl who'd been trapped becoming the woman who freed others. Not perfectly. Not without mistakes or failures or moments of crushing doubt. But real. Tangible. True. 5 years after Victoria's arrest, Clara stood in the same courtroom where she'd testified. Not as a witness this time, but as an expert. Parliament was debating tenant rights legislation, and Clara had been called to speak about practical implementation. She talked for 2 hours about profit sharing, about fair rents, about treating workers as partners instead of property. Some legislators listened, others dismissed her as an idealist. But seeds were planted. Change wouldn't happen overnight. Probably wouldn't happen in Clara's lifetime, but it would happen. She'd made sure of that. Blackmore waited outside the chamber when she finished. How'd it go? He asked. Half of them think I'm brilliant. Half think I'm insane. Clara took his arm. So about what I expected. The insane ones usually change the world. Then I'm in good company. Clara looked up at him. 5 years ago I was terrified of my own shadow. Now I'm lecturing Parliament. She laughed. That's completely absurd. That's growth. Blackmore steered them toward their carriage. You hungry? There's a place near here that makes excellent. I'm pregnant. The words fell out before Clara could plan them. She'd meant to tell him properly, at home, with time to discuss what it meant for their work, and their estates, and their carefully balanced lives. Instead, it came out on a London street in the middle of an ordinary moment. Blackmore stopped walking, stared at her. What? I'm pregnant. About 3 months. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. Clara's heart hammered. Is that? He kissed her. Right there on the street, scandalizing passers-by, not caring at all. That's wonderful, he said when he pulled back. Terrifying and wonderful, and you're sure? The doctor confirmed it yesterday. Clara's hand shook. I don't know how to do this. How to balance a child with everything else. We'll figure it out, like we figure everything else out, together. His hand settled over her still flat stomach. Our child's going to grow up watching you change the world. That's everything. Their daughter was born the following spring. They named her Charlotte after Clara's mother. She had Blackmore's gray eyes and Clara's stubborn jaw, and she screamed loud enough to wake the entire estate when she wanted attention. Clara took 3 months away from active management, learning how to be a mother while Patterson and Blackmore's steward handled day-to-day operations. It nearly killed her to delegate that much, but it also taught her that her work could survive without her constant oversight, that she'd built something sustainable, something real. Charlotte was 2 when Victoria died in prison. Pneumonia, the letter said, quick and relatively peaceful. Clara attended the funeral because it seemed like the right thing to do, but she felt nothing beyond vague pity. Victoria had spent her life destroying what others built, and she'd died with nothing to show for it. No legacy, no love, no mark on the world beyond the damage she'd caused. Clara had built the opposite, and every day, that felt like the truest victory. 10 years after that night in the Pembroke's ballroom, Clara stood in her study, the same room where Victoria had slapped her, where her father had taught her about ledgers, where she'd broken in to steal evidence. The room held ghosts, but they were quiet now. Settled. Charlotte played in the corner, building elaborate structures with blocks and explaining their irrigation systems in serious detail. She'd inherited her mother's interest in land management and her father's strategic mind. Clara suspected she'd be formidable. Blackmore appeared in the doorway. Dinner's ready. Patterson's joining us, wants to discuss the spring planting. Tell him I'll be there in a minute. Clara was reviewing letters, prioritizing responses. Women asking for advice, estates requesting consultation, legislators seeking expert testimony. Too much. Always too much. But good too much. Important too much. You're thinking again, Blackmore said. Always. Clara set down the letters. I was thinking about Victoria, about how convinced she was that destroying me would give her power. But all it did was show me what power really looks like. Which is building instead of destroying, choosing instead of controlling, standing beside someone instead of standing on them. Clara looked at Charlotte, at Blackmore, at the evidence of everything she'd fought for spread across her desk. She thought power was about cages, but it's actually about keys, and making sure everyone has them. Blackmore crossed the room, kissed her softly. You should write that down. Put it in the next book. There's going to be a next book? With you? Always. He held out his hand. Now come eat. Patterson's going to argue with you about crop rotation, Charlotte's going to demand a story, and I'm going to remind you that you don't have to save the world before breakfast. Clara took his hand, let him pull her up. Just before lunch, then? That's my girl. They walked to dinner together, Clara, Blackmore, and Charlotte. A family built on choice and partnership, and the kind of love that demanded nothing and offered everything. Outside, the sun set over fields Clara had reclaimed. Inside, a fire crackled while Patterson argued good-naturedly about winter wheat, and Charlotte drew plans for irrigation systems that would probably revolutionize farming in 20 years. Clara looked around the table, at faces she loved, at work that mattered, at a life she'd built from ruins, and felt something she'd never expected to feel again. Peace. Not perfect peace, not the absence of struggle or doubt or fear, but the peace that came from knowing who you were, what you'd built, and that you'd earned every piece of it. Victoria had tried to cage her. Society had tried to break her. Fear had tried to stop her. But Clara Whitlock, Clara Blackmore now, had done something they'd never expected. She'd survived. She'd built. She'd won. And she'd rewritten every rule that said she couldn't. That was power. That was freedom. That was enough.